Welcome, everybody, to the Traverse City Planning Commission study session. Today is Tuesday, April 16th. I'm calling this meeting to order, and I would like to first read our land acknowledgement. The land on which we gather is the territory of the Ottawa and Chippewa peoples who have stewarded this land throughout the generations. Thank you for your strength and resilience in protecting this land and inspiring us to uphold our responsibilities to do the same. Thanks for that. Roll call.
Commissioner Teller,
Here.
Commissioner Hershey,
Here.
Commissioner Treadwell, no, Commissioner Deturi, here, Commissioner O'Brien,
Here.
Commissioner Heller, here, Commissioner McGillivray,
Here.
Commissioner Anderson,
Here.
and Commissioner Knapp.
Here.
There we go. We got them all. Okay, so we're here this evening for a very exciting discussion on, it's the beginning discussion on the Draft Mobility Action Plan. It's going to be led by James Kilbourne and Chris Zoll of our consultants, Progressive AE. And I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Sichterman to see if there's anything she would like to add.
Good evening, everyone. Sean is out tonight. He's at the National Planning Conference, so he'll be back tomorrow with lots of new ideas and probably a little tired. But he asked me just to kind of turn everything over to Progressive tonight, and just a quick reminder that the Mobility Action Plan is a component of our master plan, so it will kind of be like an appendix to it. It's part and parcel of it. So when the full master plan goes through the adoption process, this will become part of it and have the same weight as our master plan. So with that, I'll just turn it over to Chris and James.
Wonderful, thank you. Good evening. I'd like to make sure the microphone is working. Is this loud enough? Are we okay? Wonderful. So you are exactly correct. This is part one of a two-part series. We're going to have a great discussion tonight. I'd like to interact as much as you are interested in and having discussions slide by slide if you would like. There's a lot of pictures and data. And then with our next presentation next week, we're really going to get into how that transforms into our actions, how it's going to work, or what we propose on how it works. So we're going to do introductions. We're going to talk about where we've been, the Mobility Action Plan process and intent. We're going to move to what we've heard. We're going to have a lot of discussion and slides around community feedback, data that we've gathered. We're going to talk about where we're going with this process, which really sets the table for the meat and potatoes of the next meeting. But we recognize that the public engagement process is very important. Master plan recognizes this well, and you see throughout this process that we're collaborating with the master plan with some very creative opportunities. So many of you have come across Progressive AE before. We've been doing quite a bit of work in the community. My name is Chris Zoll. I'm the transportation practice lead. I am a professional engineer in the state of Michigan. And prior to joining Progressive AE, I used to work for the city of Grand Rapids. Years working on the public side. So that's a bit of our experience. And James, introduce yourself.
Hi everyone, James Kilbourne, transportation planner with Progressive. So glad to be here. Prior to Progressive, I worked at McKenna and then also Ottawa County. Glad to be here.
All right, so where we've been, the Mobility Action Plan process and its intent. We're going to start with some of the intent of the Mobility Action Plan right from the beginning. The process was intended to and outlined the expectation of capturing Traverse City's mobility vision and its values. With that, we were intending to develop a mobility network that's based on data, crash data, understanding our existing infrastructure, as well as gathering community feedback. Through this process, we've been identifying challenges in the current mobility infrastructure process. And we're going to talk a little bit about identifying some of the roles and responsibilities of city staff, the public, elected appointed officials on implementing, on living the mobility plan once it becomes adopted. And a part of this is very much intentional to enshrine the mobility plan into capital improvement process. That way we are implementing the mobility network that we're proposing with our regular operating procedures. So, for example, if we're going to need to do a water main repair, designing a capital project for that street, what does the bike plan call for in that section? That way we're stacking together all of our processes, which the Planning Commission, have you had an opportunity to be apprised of the design team change that the city has recently gone through?
Yes.
Right? So that's become an integral process, one of the outcomes of the work that we have been doing together on them. All right, so as we've been talking, this process is done intentionally alongside the master plan, intended to be adopted part and part of the master plan. We started in August of 2002, and we had our first joint open house in October 3. This process has been guided by the Mobility Leadership Committee, mobility experts, city staff, as well as elected and appointed officials. At a broad overview, we had 12 committee meetings. We had 3 joint planning commission and city commission meetings, 2 open house events, one of those done in conjunction with the master plan. We had 4 stakeholder meetings, group sessions, and 2 online surveys. Again, that was done in the master plan process. For this timeline, there's a lot of activity that's happened over the last couple of years. A bit difficult to see, sorry for the font, but we're going to kind of talk through each of these milestones through the upcoming slides as a part of the process. All right, so community feedback. What have we heard? What data did we gather? I apologize, we've got an error on this slide. The qualitative data is not exactly equal to the quantitative, as suggested. In fact, we were intending to represent, so on the qualitative side, our focus group meetings, our community events, community surveys, as well as the leadership community, right, gathering that verbal feedback as we work through the process. And then on the quantitative data side, traffic volumes, crash data, network conditions, existing mobility networks, the gaps that currently exist, as well as some key destinations. So again, apologize for the error in the slide, but we've got further information on the quantitative data further in the presentation. All right, everybody's tracking good so far? Feel free to interrupt as you'd like, ask some questions as we go if that would be helpful. So for our focus group meetings, we had an excellent October afternoon, most of the day actually, over at the Hickory Hills ski area, where we first started with focus groups around city staff. So we invited planning, engineering, utilities, parking, light and power, police and fire, water and sewer, public services. And we were able to have a conversation around what the existing state of our system is, what the objectives of the mobility plan were, and how each of these departments played a critical role in operating, maintaining, and owning these plans and this infrastructure. From there, we had invited a macro mobility focus group. So we were expanding the vision to talk to those regional transportation partners, such as MDOT, the marina, Indian Trails, the townships, surrounding townships, Elmwood, Garfield, and East Bay, the Airport Authority, Networks Northwest, and the road. So it's important that we're recognizing that we've got mobility partners outside of the city limits, outside of our 7 or so square miles, and that our infrastructure connects with their infrastructure. And we want to do that in a very meaningful and intentional. Another focus group that we had on that day was the micromobility. So that's where we bring it down to the system users and the operators. The Beta, TART, and Norte have been very vocal in an important part of the process. Groundworks, Traverse City Public Schools, and the Capital City Cycling Club, and the Traverse City Track Club to provide some input on the micro discussion. And then lastly, we concluded the day with a general stakeholder focus group where we invited some of the other stakeholders in the area, including E3, Northwestern Michigan College, the YMCA, the Public Health Department, Munson Health, Traverse Area District Library. So from that, we gathered a bunch of information and made this impossible to read. Sorry for that, Sonny. It's difficult to share this information. It is in our meeting minutes memo. All of this is available with the draft report. And if anybody needs it separately, we'd be glad to. All right. So after we had met with all of those mobility focus groups, we went out alongside the master plan with a community survey. This first survey ran in September and October of 2022, for which we generated about 1,900 responses, which is rather robust for a community of our size. The number of survey responses was this exceeded the expectations of the master plan, and is one of the more robust survey responses that I've been a part of in the work that we've been doing the past 5 years. We did follow up with a second survey in that November, where we had roughly a third of the number of respondents as we did for the first survey. And so some of the questions, so just so you can get a feel for some of the types of questions, if you didn't get an opportunity to interact with the survey, how do you transport yourself on a daily basis? Select all of those that apply, for school, for work, fun. And then we also asked that aspirational question. Ideally, I'd like to travel by, and transit bus showed up very well. This is an interesting and strong response, as well as if you put together skateboard, scooter, bicycle, and walking, all the non-motorized components, that's a pretty strong showing on how people would like to be able to travel throughout. Right, moving over to question 13 on the right, what modes of transportation should Traverse City prioritize going forward? Rank them from highest, number 1, to lowest, number 8. In going through that exercise, walking was the one that scored the highest, similar to conversations we had around East Front Street back during that design process. But very notable that car-oriented, was the second place here, just behind that. And so we all recognize that moving around by car is something many people do, is very valuable. But bus and cycling coming just behind that with other modes. So recognizing that we're trying to find that appropriate balance between walking, cycling, non-motorized, as well as meeting the commercial needs and vehicle needs of our. All right, so October 26th, 2022, at the Haggerty Center, we had a fantastic community event. A great space, a large room, in conjunction with the master plan. Master plan took half of the room, mobility plan took the other half of the room, and we had a whole bunch of fun and interesting ways to gather feedback, part of our process. So through our stations, we had a billboard-size mapping exercise where you were invited to come up and share your thoughts using dots. Green dot, I like to walk or bike here. Yellow dots, this is an area we need improvement. Red dots, I avoid this area. Blue dots, this is a key destination. So this process gave us a lot of feedback, and there's some trends that you're going to see in some of the data for the slides. So I don't know, it's kind of hard to see in the slide. The red dots kind of stand out a little bit, maybe a little bit more prominently than the green dots. But if you were to catalog those and put them into our GIS system, which we did, this is what all of the green dots look like, the farthest on the left. Red dots here, and you can see that for the green dots along the waterfront, along Boardman Lake Trail, and the downtown areas are concentrations of areas that people like to walk. For the areas that people don't like to bike or walk, we can see that Division, Grandview Parkway show up kind of predominantly in that area. Similar with places for improvements, Grandview Parkway, and then destinations kind of overlap with what we see for the green dots, downtown area, the waterfront, and around the Boardman. All right, so as you engaged with the different exercises, we included what's often referred to as a SWOT exercise, a strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and challenges of 469 notes across all of the boards, fantastic feedback, providing the input, the criticism, the positives, opportunities throughout the corridor, and that was boiled down into, it was summarized, and each one of those sticky notes was cataloged into a spreadsheet for which we were able to coalesce themes around the feedback that we were. A lot of these exercises really go to that theme level understanding while still having each comment cataloged as part of the. Now, this next station was the one I was most concerned about. We were inviting people in to artistically represent their ideas, their thoughts for the mobility plan. And, I had thought we would end up with maybe 3 drawings on the board. But by the end of the evening, the glass was covered. Over 80 respondents had taken the time to share their thoughts, share their images, tell their stories, and, this graphic. Some are very elaborate. You can see lots of detail and very robust feedback process, giving people the opportunity to share their thoughts, not just in sticky notes or dots, but graphically as well. And even more fun, if you will, was our fake radio station. So we held a mobility FM radio booth where people were invited over, and James had some prompts asking the community members some questions. Tell us your mobility. What are some of the things that you value about moving around down? We got some fantastic feedback about this process, about hearing people's stories. There was a lot of discussion around remembering how it used to be. Days of being able to ride your bike or service a paper route or walk downtown as a youngster. And the sense was that that's not as available as it used to be. Cars are louder, the cars are faster, there's more concern for safety, maybe how the town operates. But this was, you enjoyed this exercise?
I did.
James?
Yeah, it's not many opportunities where you get to be a radio. It's a lot of fun.
I did have to share with people that it was a fake radio. There were a fair number of people that said, I don't want to be on the radio. Says, no, this is just all for our exercise. So the community open house #1 by the numbers. So we had over 200 attendees that evening. You can see that we had over 550 dots and sticky notes on the mapping exercise, 460 notes on the SWOT analysis, 83 drawing exercises, which is 58% of the, and over 40 interviews with 100 minutes of audio content. So a very robust engagement. The people that came interacted, shared their thoughts. Very much appreciated. So that information was distilled from the community open house into, like I was saying earlier, the Microsoft Excel, again being reviewed for themes. The dot mapping was put into the GIS data that we showed you earlier. The results were filed and discussed in an open community open house summary report, and that feedback indeed informed the proposed network map and the mobility plan vision. It's going to be more of the discussion for our next presentation. All right, so that led us to community open house #2, March of 2023 at the excuse me. So as a part of the open house #2, we wanted to make sure that what we were capturing from the community open house #1 was being distilled into a vision statement that could represent the plan, represent the vision. So participants were asked to review the 4 draft vision statements below, rank their favorite one, and as you can see, there was kind of a split vote here. Obviously, vision statement #2 being the least popular, but vision statement 4, 1, 3, and 4, 16, 49 votes were received much more positively. So that top getter, vision statement #1, Traverse City will be a place where people can access jobs, housing, amenities, and natural features using a safe and balanced mobility network that reduces the region's carbon. So there's a lot of values packed into that statement. Some wordsmithing and opportunity to drill that in directly. But let's read vision statement #3 because it was very similar and vote getting. Traverse City will be a community designed for healthy, active living that provides and promotes safe, inviting, efficient, and inclusive access to public and private attractions, regardless of age, physical ability, or choice of transportation. So as a community, we value sustainability, we value the environment, we also value access and mobility, and those are the two that So additional exercises as a part of the open house #2 included the action plan values. As a community, we asked them to identify values as important for the mobility action plan or not for mobility action. So connectivity obviously ranked very high. Environmental, reflected in the vision statement, ranked highest out of all of them. Adaptability, a little bit lower. Prosperity, a little bit lower. And then people focused. Everybody agreed that people are an important part of the value statement. Then we had also asked people, what should we call the plan? It's a subset of the master plan, but when we're working, when we're talking about the plan, what should we be referring to it as? And the primary vote getter, despite some creative opportunities, Traverse City Mobility Action Plan is but stuck. So again, we used another billboard-sized map to talk about the proposed mobility network, where we were seeking feedback specifically by showing the existing network as it is today. And all of the sticky notes were then transferred into dot points that were put into our GIS tool for mapping. Excuse me. All right, so boiling down community open house number 2 by the numbers, we had 100 attendees. And again, this one was not done in conjunction with the master plan. It was just specifically for the mobility plan. So we got 31 comments on the vision statement, 22 comments on the values, 6 additional comments on the naming exercise, almost 70 comments on the mobility map exercise, and then the complete streets brand exercise. All right, so those were our 2 community engagement meetings. Let's talk about the Mobility Leadership Committee that's been helping to guide this process in development of the Mobility Action Plan. So this group included appointed city commission staff, city staff from planning, engineering, communications, and public services, Downtown Development Authority, Norte, Beta, Mobility Network, ART, were all a part of the committee. 12 committee meetings that met on a regular basis to talk about data, the process, the feedback, as well as the operational needs and existing, or prior to that time, existing city process for capital. All right, so moving to the quantitative. So this is where existing traffic volumes, our bicyclist crash data, our crash density, where they're occurring, pedestrian crash data, as well as their density, and then utilizing a fantastic partner in Tool Design, who is a leader in non-motorized networks throughout the country, used one of their proprietary tools to reflect bicycle level of stress, pedestrian level of stress, as well as an analysis for the distance to the nearest low stress crossing. So using the qualitative data, the feedback that we got from the public, measuring that with the quantitative data. So here's a representative of the ADT, the darker the color, the higher the traffic volume. And you can see there's a strong correlation here. More difficult to cross streets that have high traffic. It feels less comfortable as a cyclist or pedestrian. The higher volume street. So as it existed throughout this process, here is a representation of the existing bicycle network. There is a myriad of treatment types throughout the community, but prior to this process, there was not a plan. There was not a specific vision and values that were stated for the network. And that's a big part of why this process occurred to begin with. Pairing that with the existing sidewalk network, nationally, as a community, sidewalks have been more socially acceptable than on-street cycling infrastructure has been. We've been building sidewalks for decades. I'll tell you, the first on-street bicycle facility in the city of Grand Rapids didn't happen until 2010. But we've been building sidewalks since, who knows. Now, that doesn't mean that we've got them fully built out, and there are some gaps in the existing sidewalk network, and that were identified in the recommendations. All right, so as a part of that analysis tool, that tool design group did with us, looks at the safe opportunities, or more comfortable opportunities for crossing streets. Generally, that's a signalized intersection for the higher volume streets. And like with the ADT map, the darker the color, the further it is from a safer crossing. So this gave us some perspective on some of those areas around town where there's not a nearby or reasonable crossing. Distance between safe crossing is great. This is a very helpful tool in helping to identify areas for us to recommend some improvement. Commissioner.
Yes, I would like to clarify that, especially for higher volume routes, this is the nearest signalized crossing. Understandable that much of this process was before certain changes have been made, but notably with the with the redoing of Division Street between 7th and 14th, it has created a median strip around 11th Street, and that, yes, it's not a signalized crossing, it doesn't have a hawk signal even, it doesn't have stop signs, but it is much more widely used and feels much safer as a pedestrian or a bicyclist than it did before, despite showing up as red.
Correct.
Here.
Right. This was the previous. Thank you for that comment. And I have had that similar experience in crossing there myself. That median is. All right. So similar to that level of stress for that pedestrian crossing, this is what it looks like for cycling. Again, a very strong correlation between the higher volume corridors, larger throughput corridors, red, the highest stress streets, and the dark blue are the lowest stress streets. So as we get into it with our presentation next week, you'll see that we've identified utilizing lower stress streets over the higher stress streets in many locations. Safer, they're more comfortable for cyclists that still provide that mobility activity at the community. Now for the pedestrians, the level of stress for pedestrians is more point-based or intersection-based. Again, the red being the more difficult crossing locations, blue being the lower stress, lowest stress part of their evaluation. And we that same correlation between Grandview Parkway and East Front Street. So in developing the mobility network, we had the surveys, we had stakeholder groups, we had public engagement, open houses, we had our joint committee meetings, and then you mix that with all of the quantitative data, level of stress, the crashes, traffic volume, distance to the nearest crossing. All of that was utilized to create the proposed mobility network map, which is kind of the conclusion of today's information. Looking to, so where are we going to go from here? When we come back next time, we're going to have that mobility network map laid out for you that's included all of that quantitative and qualitative analysis so that we can have some discussion around what the community is seeing and how that network plays out, then how we're going to own, operate, and maintain that system. So we're going to be discussing the map in particular. We're going to make sure that the mobility vision is going to be a part of the infrastructure process. We're talking about what the capital improvement process, about how the design team has been introduced, involved. We're going to make sure that we've got those clear roles and responsibilities so that we're hearing from emergency services, that we're hearing from maintenance, that we're understanding what the values of the community, what the leadership in the community is asking for us to achieve. Then we're going to put that action and the mobility action plan through our existing processes. Plan doesn't recommend a dedicated millage and a windfall of money to go and implement a overly prescriptive plan. We recognize that that was not a realistic path forward. Instead, we end up with a recommendation that utilizes the existing resources that we have available that are done through these lenses of mobility for every capital improvement project in the process. We're going to do talking about adopting timeline plan, and I believe you've already seen some of the commitment and action from city staff in moving forward. That's all of the slide content that I have for today. Only interrupted once. I was hoping for more. Maybe I wasn't provocative enough, but I'd be glad to go back to any previous slide or have further discussion as you see.
We might have some questions. Commissioners, anybody have questions?
I just had a note. It was interesting, this slide with the dots, so the blue, green, yellow, and red. It totally depended, I think, on the person, because there was some overlap for some of those areas. Like, clearly you can see the open space is a do not go to for some people, and yet it is also a I love walking here on green. So there are definitely areas, and then it's also a destination. So it's very interesting to see the overlap that way. I can't really come up with any reasoning behind other than like certain people go for walks for certain purposes. Like maybe they like people watching and they go to the open space, because this really did pull residents. It's not like it pulled the tourists who would obviously choose open space. Do you have any other context, do you think, or is that kind of in alignment what you were picturing?
So we recognize that we're not going to make everybody happy. And a lot of diversity in the community. What one group or demographic values may or may not be what another values. But we did want to understand the trend, theme. So knowing that there's not a perfect solution out there, but we can still see the areas of interest, opportunities for improvement. I think we've been able to discover recommendations based on that feedback for our upcoming plan. Good question.
Thanks. Thank you.
What qualifies as a high-volume street?
Yeah, good question. James, do we have the ADTs listed on the map?
We have the ADTs, but typically 8 to 10,000 and above is going to be high volume.
I mean, are you using is there like a universal standard, or is it something you settled on for Traverse City?
Yeah, so this is derived from state data. So we access the AADT traffic data from the state. So they're continuously monitoring that. So we pulled from that, as well as the city provided traffic counts as well.
But good question about a standard. There isn't a documented, universally accepted standard that I'm aware of. In my experience, streets having 10,000 vehicles or more are often your collectors or your urban thoroughfares. We wouldn't want 10,000 vehicles on a residential or neighborhood street. There, we're looking for closer to 2,000 cars. So it is subjective, but it is fairly consistent throughout the communities that we work in that 10,000 or more is considered appropriate.
So clarification, So the actual, in the back of the draft mobility plan, there's some maps that show some trails that are proposed. And is that something that now, we're still going to, in the next step, you're going to present us with actually a more detailed plan that kind of explains what is being proposed?
Exactly.
And that's what we're going to discuss.
So
Okay.
this is the data behind, the engagement and the data behind recommendation, which I think will be a larger discussion for our next.
So there's several sections and some of the statements I really loved in this overall plan, especially the vision and the values. And I thought they were very, not overly broad, but broad enough to be all-encompassing and to focus on all mobility. I know it says in the plan the focus is on bikes. You've referred to this as the bike plan. And I'm trying to get a handle on where it kind of falls. You said in your statements, you've called out areas that, don't have sidewalks, but you also have statements throughout here where say the city is generally very well, built up with sidewalks. I live on east of Garfield. And east of Garfield, I would disagree with that statement. And it's, the references, having lived there for 20 plus years, I feel like we're sort of neglected and forgotten. And even the areas where you've called out some spots where there are no sidewalks, which is accurate, but there's also spots that you consider part of the sidewalk area that don't have consistent sidewalks. Where people walk in the street because you've got sidewalks in front of 3 houses, a gap in front of 2 houses, a single sidewalk in front of a house, no sidewalk to the corners, on either corners. There's no network there. That's sort of the triangle area. But that runs throughout, even where we have sidewalks in my neighborhood. It's the same thing. I guess my concern is that it's not being really called out or addressed specifically when you do note, which is a very positive, and one of the things I liked about this plan is that you have talk about complete streets and how your focus, is not necessarily a complete street on a side street could be different than a complete street on the street on the city's definition on Munson or Front, whichever one you want to call it. It's Munson in my neighborhood, where we have no sidewalks for large stretches. And that, and you note that these are very important corridors. I was a little disappointed that you gave the 8th and Munson Street a pink star for a crossing. If you ever walk that crossing,
Once.
it's a huge distance on an angle.
Yep.
And I don't know, but every time I cross it, my stress level is very high because you have constantly got to be looking, people making right turns, left turns. And no, I understand you're doing it qualitatively based on traffic and speeds and the fact that it has an intersection, but it's not a good intersection. And it'd be nice if some of the intersections, if you consider distance, because we have a number of intersections where the distance across the intersection, because they are Y intersections, big sweeping intersections, we're fixing some of those finally, but not enough. It should impact the stress level of those intersections. Yeah.
Fantastic feedback. I do have some thoughts to share. The sidewalk pattern that exists today is a result of some of our current development policies, right? So as the properties are being developed, there's requirements often for installing a sidewalk, but that is limited to the extent of the property. So we end up with this aspiration of connection done piecemeal that has yet to fully connect itself. One of the opportunities we're going to have in the future is with the capital improvement dollars, do we end up with a sidewalk-specific program that is intended to directly address gaps? That's an option. Do we have capital improvement projects that are identified for that section of roadway or one of those sections of roadways where we set aside dollars, where we intentionally make those connections as a part of that capital process? And then there's self-assessments and other means of completing some of that as well. So the data that we have for sidewalks in particular came from the city's GIS data. So the accuracy of that has been discussed several different times. We have made some known adjustments that weren't accurately represented in the city's data, making those updates. The intent is that that database is going to continue to live and change, especially as we install new infrastructure or if we identify other gaps. And so this brings to light the opportunity to intentionally plan for making those connections. Whereas under the current state, I don't think that you would be able to say that there's a plan or an intended methodology to achieve that other than when the property gets redeveloped, the sidewalk is. And I appreciate your comments about the 8th and Munson intersection as well. Crossing distance is a factor in stress of crossing. There were lots of comments and feedback about that intersection in particular. And as we move forward with capital improvement opportunities or other safety grant opportunities, that's an intersection that we can pull out and see if we can make some adjustments. Island, timing, curb radii, or et cetera. But I do think that is one of the intersections.
Yeah, I don't know if there's a good fix for that intersection, just because of the way it lays, but I'm thankful at least we
I
finally,
have a fix, but
after
it's
years,
very expensive.
we got we finally got a crosswalk there.
But it's important that the plan call it out.
Correct.
Right, so as long as it calls those dangerous intersections out, then future commission can.
Right, because
work on
then the expectation of the city, of city staff, is that here's the plan, here's our construction project, hey, we need to prioritize an improvement. What can we do about it?
Go ahead, Rich.
Yeah, I don't want to get into details of specific things because that will be in next week's discussion. But in the process, I like that we looked at previous plans and had a lot of community engagement, but I feel like there was a couple things missing, and I'll say that as somebody looking back on the process despite being involved in it the whole way. Namely, both current and previous capital improvement plans might have identified, hey, here is some sidewalk connection, bike trail, pedestrian bridge, etc., that doesn't exist now and maybe just a visionary project, but if this is going to be, like the rest of the master plan, something that the city uses as a guiding document going forward, it would be useful to have those rolled in. Also, yeah, there are some things that have been added from that in terms of, hey, here's a sidewalk that there's, or need for a sidewalk here, but we don't have the funds for it, but we can put it in some future plan. And in a lot of the cases, those got brought to light through this process because people in those neighborhoods say, hey, I want to be able to get from here to there, and there isn't a sidewalk here. Let's put a sidewalk here. But there's other places where the city has identified, directly or indirectly, the need or desire for connections in the future. And also, though it's harder to quantify and it requires a lot more looking at the ground conditions, but identifying not just where there's a superficial gap in a transportation network, but looking at desire paths of, hey, here's a trail, here's a road, and you can think that there's plenty of access from the intersections along that road to the trail, but there's this one or more specific paths that people are taking that might be an opportunity for a connection there, or across a railroad track or something like that. And a third thing, though it kind of combines the two, is several years ago the city went out with bonds for to fill new gap and infill with our sidewalk network in partnership with Safe Routes to School that did identify a number of gaps and places that were underserved by sidewalks. But the priority there was areas with high densities of students in proximity to schools, because that's the Safe Routes to School criteria. So we had a lot of sidewalks built in the Traverse Heights neighborhood. We had gaps filled in other neighborhoods, like Central neighborhood where I live. But the Triangle neighborhood, as McGillivray references, you do have a very piecemeal situation of sidewalks, and it just happens to be a bit too far away from specific schools and doesn't have the student density to have met those Safe Routes to School criteria. Yet I'm sure if we dug through some of the documentation from those grant processes and bonding, we would have said, hey, here's other gaps that could still be brought forward as potential opportunities.
So, great comments. I'm bummed that we are missing some of the trail plans or intentions that weren't brought up during part of the process. I'd be glad to try to find a way to reference those or include those as a part of this process as best we can. I also want to emphasize that it's a living document, right? And that, you know, it's a plan document, and plans evolve, plans change. So a route that may be specifically identified due to development patterns, ability interests, or whatever, may need to change, and the plan needs to have the ability to make those changes. There is some intended flexibility there. I feel like I heard you say some of the informal connections
Yes.
are also opportunities. I don't disagree with you at all. I think those are very valuable in a network as well. So crossing, you know, the short path between, you know, the trail and a right-of-way, or, you know, the corner of somebody's property, often what that runs into is private property. So
Yes, it can. Or if it's, say, crossing a railroad, you don't want to necessarily have unsignaled railroad crossings.
right.
But they can still be identified in the process, and I'm sure a few of those could be found that run into fewer issues.
And I think I'd like to find a way to add a little bit of opportunity for those informal connections, such that, you know, what does, if you don't ask, you know, the answer is already no, right? But, you know, if there's a willing property owner, is there an opportunity to create some sort of connection that they'd be willing with? So,
And sometimes it's because, hey, there's a utility easement already down here and people are using it, but we don't think of, okay, you can just actually put a trail under that utility easement.
But I think what we're all hoping, as far as whatever goals come out of this, that, you know, whether it's us or future commissions will be able to make decisions on that. So for instance, if walkability is a goal, then you can add sidewalks at any time to make it more walkable, right? If you have the money and the ability to do it. So I just, I hope there's specific things like that in there so we can make future decisions like that. And the other thing I wanted to ask, and I know this is probably for the next meeting, but, bicycling, walking, busing is very important to our town, but I also think a lot about our aging population, and I'm wondering if any other types of multimodal were considered, like even pedicabs or trolleys or things that can get closer to people's homes. I didn't know if you talked about other things other than the big ones.
So scooters have become a popular conversation piece, as well as the evolution of bikes. And so we've gotten a fair amount of concerns or questions kind of in that realm. Specific to pedicabs or other, so many of these variations of cycling have the similar rights to the road as a cyclist does. And many of the standard infrastructure accommodations work with those devices. So they weren't specifically identified as unique accommodations for, say, a pedicab type situation, but we know that they're legal road users, that in a lot of instances they work with the standard cycling infrastructure, a cycle. So if there are some areas or devices that you feel aren't specifically captured enough in the document, I'd be glad to look further into that.
Yeah, I'll really digest that second half before the next meeting, but I'm thinking about things like if Beta only goes on a certain route, and you can't get to that route, or you're 85 and you're not going to be on a scooter, what other ways are there to get closer to somebody's residence that can take them around? It isn't just bicycling and walking and busing. So that's what I'm thinking.
In larger communities, paratransit, dial-a-ride
Yeah.
are often some of those solutions.
And we do have that. Beta offers that,
Okay.
Yes.
a link service, which is like Uber, basically.
Okay, do people use?
Yeah.
Okay.
People use it on my street all the time, so.
Okay, good.
Mhm.
I walk everywhere, so what do I that's all I know. So, all right, well, thank you for that consideration. Ms. Henderson.
Thank you. I'm coming in at the tail end of this process, so forgive me if I'm asking about issues that have already been fully discussed and resolved. But I was a bit surprised that public transit was addressed so lightly within the 90-page plan that I reviewed earlier today. And I just wondered if you could tell us a little bit about the rationale for that exclusion. And then also, I'm interested in your perspective on mobility for people who are already using assistive mobility devices, people with wheelchairs and walkers and canes, and where do they fit within this model of mobility? And then another question, I bet Katie would be able to help distribute this PowerPoint presentation to the commission, and if there's going to be a separate PowerPoint for next week, if we could please have that in advance.
Yep, this one was provided Friday, last Friday for the packet,
send it out.
and we were intending to do the same for the presentation. So Friday, it'll be available.
Thank you.
Here.
And next week, we will be reviewing the full draft plan.
Yes, so we're intending to walk through in a presentation very similar today that's going to be focusing on the map and the recommendations in particular. If there are any specific pages or paragraphs or content that you would like to discuss. Not going to know exactly what that's going to be until we talk about it, but be glad to talk through
But it'll be a process of going through page by page.
if you would like. I was intending to do more of a summary and
Highlights.
overview, but if you would like to,
But you're going to be getting apparently the plan on Friday before, so everybody jot down their questions on particular pages and bring them in.
right, the draft plan is currently,
Right, yeah, we're reading it.
Yeah, they have
So
that.
we
They
have
just
it.
didn't have the,
We just didn't have
this
to.
part.
Didn't have the presentation.
Yeah.
Yeah,
so if there's sections you want included in the presentation for next week's discussion, glad to do so.
I'll send you my personal list.
I have a question on page 66 where we're talking about street improvement process. And this is supposedly reflective of the current process or the proposed process? Because it says in here you establish capital improvement program and identify street projects, and it says developed by city staff and the planning commission. Did something change? Is the planning commission now involved in that? Because the planning commission currently does not develop the capital improvement plan, nor do we propose street projects.
Right,
It all comes to us from staff. That's a current process.
correct.
And if you start saying we're initiating street processes, then people might start coming to us and raising questions about why their streets aren't getting done.
Oh, they already do, and we have
I
a good
know, but-
answer for them.
I know, but I don't want them pointing to this and saying,
Yeah.
how come you're not fixing my street?
I wonder if it meant review, because we do review it.
Approved by
Yeah.
this planning commission, but developed by.
Yeah.
Erase us out of there.
Yeah, we're not developing.
Little white out there.
Good catch, Brian.
So Commissioner Anderson had a couple of points. You want me to respond to
Well,
those
one
now?
was, sure, please.
Yeah. So in talking about the public transit being lightly included in particular, the transit agency has its own master plan. And the Beta was included as a part of the process. They were on this steering committee. And so we valued their feedback and input as a part of the process, but we're developing the mobility plan without directing Beta's assets and system and network from a city standpoint.
Do you foresee that those two plans will ever be reconciled?
They've been a fantastic partner in the discussions, so I'd like to believe that that will happen, that there will be a complementary interest. I have seen other communities that have done very well together in respecting each other's plans, but I've also seen other communities where they've augmented routes as a result of an action from one side or the other. So, there have been compromises that have been made in other communities, but I'm optimistic that both plans will be complementary, specifically with Beta being a very engaging partner.
But they are ultimately two plans
Yeah.
approved by two different boards that are not beholden one to the other.
Yeah. Two entirely separate bodies moving through, yeah.
And then your question about people utilizing assistive mobility devices.
Yeah.
The design expectation, this mobility plan doesn't address the specific, cross-section, detailed design of facilities. The baseline assumption is that that's covered through AASHTO, which is the specific design manual, and the new and so this document is a guiding plan, not a design guide. And so the expectation is that all of the design guides for accessibility, all of the design parameters for accessibility will be met with the implementation of the,
So it's implied rather than
Correct.
stated.
but I think we could clarify that in a statement.
Probably a good idea. Mitch?
Yeah, and getting back to that, yes, they are two separate master plans, but and it's a little late to include it now, but I feel like it might have been helpful to include a graphic that does show the current beta route map, and maybe another graphic showing how much of the city is within a 5-minute walk of a bus stop.
Yeah.
Because yes, that is something subject to change independent from this plan, but that can still serve as a handy reference and a guiding perspective for recognizing what areas we might want to then prioritize fixing a crosswalk or a gap in the sidewalk network a little more.
And with this being in a draft stage, I'd be glad to see if we can get some existing information that's available and then include that. Absolutely. Great
I think that's a
suggestion.
good idea.
One of the issues that, of course, is challenging for us at a lot of levels, be it population or housing or transit, has to do with seasonality. And I believe I read in the draft that the average daily traffic data is available on a monthly basis as well as your annual roll-up. And I wondered if there was any conversation about trying to take a look at the traffic stress points both during high season and during low season, and if that would be helpful in any way.
So good question. The average annual daily traffic is usually the information that's collected periodically with those tubes, sensors, or cameras that are deployed in the field. My experience is that those are often deployed on a 3-year rotating basis. And so you're capturing 24, 48 hours of information once every 3 years. And for some segments, I'm sure it's much longer than that. It's every 7 years. So the monthly data is only available for where there are count stations that are permanently installed year-round. And there are some of those, any of those that I'm aware of are owned by the DOT and managed by the Department of Transportation. I'm not certain that they make that data available. I don't know why they wouldn't, but more of the information that I'm used to accessing are those counts that are collected every 3 years, which will get us 24 hours worth.
So the data that you're showing here and that you're using would be a snapshot from a particular point in time, or it would be a roll-up of 3 years worth of data, or how should I understand that?
Yep, so as we had stated and referenced, it's not on this slide, but this is the MDOT data source. So it is the state of Michigan's traffic data set, and that is that collection of counts taken every 3 years. You can go back into that system and see historically what that count was this year, 3 years ago, etc. Now, you had also made a statement about the seasonality.
Yeah.
And that absolutely
Maybe there's
is
a better
is
way of
factor
getting
as
to
well.
that.
The DOT and seasonality of Traverse City area in particular is very robust. It's very acute. There is a significant factor that's applied. And the DOT has recommended seasonal adjustments that are used depending on when you're collecting data. So if we were to do a traffic study on Munson Avenue in February, we could then go to that seasonal factor and adjust it up by 70, 80, 100% to represent the higher peak season which is usually the design intent. We're often looking at kind of busier seasons for designing our infrastructure. So then you went on to ask a question related to the appropriate infrastructure design for the peak season or the off-peak season, what I felt like I heard.
I guess I'm just as much interested in, does the data show us a significant enough difference that,
Oh, yes.
that the plan should be reflective of that? And when we eventually set priorities for actual infrastructure construction, how we use that?
I think I want to think more about what I feel like you're asking,
Okay.
but I also want to make the statement that designing for the peak season, a treatment that will work for the peak season will also work for the off-peak season. So that it's a more conservative approach for the year-round experience. And so what might be over-designed for the non-peak season, but right, we're designing for that season. But that would be my response to usually tend towards the higher order solution for the higher peak season rather than
The downside being capital requirements, of course.
and maintenance. Absolutely.
Does anyone else have a statement or a question? All right, well, gentlemen, thank you so much for your presentation. We're looking forward to the continuation next.
Wonderful. Thank you for your time tonight.
Sure. Are there any announcements? Katie? Ms. Sickerman? Okay, any public comment? All right, then I guess this meeting is adjourned and we'll see you next week. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
So cold in here. I thought it was gonna be
It's so cold in here.